Okay, hello everyone. This is an alternative direct instruction for Wednesday, February 24th, 5th. What is today? 25th. There we go. And the weather kept some away. We had 2 in each center, so I decided to let them go. And I'm making this video that has direct instruction for our narrative workshop that we were going to do. So I'm going to switch over to our screen and walk you through the lesson plan for today. Direct instruction. Let's see. Okay, so I would like everyone, in order to get participation points for tonight, you will be doing going through this video and then starting out posting to our narrative interviews board. And if you click on here, you'll get to the narrative interview debrief and feedback, where I want you to share your thoughts, your joys, your takeaways, any questions that you had from your narrative interview, and just let us know where you went, who you interviewed, and what kinds of things you came away with. And you can just double click on here, write your name, and then a little summary of your takeaway. The discussion about narrative techniques. I would like each one of you to read through and do some practice here on the narrative techniques page that is at this link. You'll notice that 4 important elements of narrative are point of view. So who is, from what point of view is your story being told? The narration, who is the narrator and who is he speaking to? Speech, how does your speech, your conversation, your dialogue happen? And then tense, when did the story happen? And are you telling it as though it is happening right now, even if it's a past tense event, or are you positioning it in the past? So the one thing about this page, it has some great information. The little exercises that it has for each are fraught with typos, and during class and during our exercise, I was going to have you practice editing and telling me some of the revision techniques that you would use on this. So I want you to keep your mind in that venue when you go through here, looking at the versions, deciding which version this is of point of view. Narration, what type of narration? Direct frame narration, which is one I think many of you might be using for your narrative, and indirect narration. So go through each version and decide which form of narration it is. Speech, direct speech, reported speech, or free indirect speech. What kind of dialogue are you going to be using with your characters? Test yourself out here, practice analyzing and identifying those. And then past, really past tense, present tense, or future. Very doubtful that you will use future in this particular writing task for narratives of elders. But past tense and present tense. Lots of people tell stories that happened in the past in a present tense form, but it is a difficult one to stay in. People usually keep shifting, unintentionally shifting back to past tense. So my suggestion would be for everyone to stick in past tense during their entire narrative. But please run through this and figure out which one specifically you know you are going to use and plan that consciously. Analyzing and practicing techniques. Actually, I said there are 2 things. There are actually 3 things that you'll need to do in order to get full participation points for today. The narrative interview board, as I said, and then this next thing, techniques analyzed and practiced. If you click on there, it'll bring up a presentation that really tells a lot about different things you need to keep in mind as you craft your narrative. Narratives are a sequence of events, well-chosen details, well-structured events and sequencing. Remember that you need to engage and orient the reader. That's done through the exposition of your story, where you set out a problem or conflict, the situation, where you are, when you are, observations and significance, establishing one or multiple plot points or points of view, introducing your narrator. You can introduce yourself in a certain way. You'd be using a narrative frame that way, or you can simply tell your character's story, your informant's story. But you're going to be exposing or setting out in that exposition your characters, and then you're going to be really creating a smooth progression of experiences. The narrative techniques that you need to keep in mind and be consciously using are dialogue. So we're going to do a little practice using dialogue in a little while. Pacing, which is your manipulation of time, where you slow things down, you speed things up intentionally. Description and imagery. Reflection or flashbacks. Multiple plot lines. Developing experiences, events, or characters through your writing techniques. Ooh, sorry about that. Sorry. All right. Other things that you need to keep in mind. Your precise words and phrases. Using imagery. Conveying a vivid picture. Painting that picture with your words. Telling details. Sensory language. Again, the imagery. And then providing a conclusion that follows from and reflects on what is experienced, observed, or resolved over the course of the narrative. So you will have your exposition at the beginning, where you're setting out your conflict, plot, themes, and your characters, and then you'll have your conclusion, which is your falling action, your resolution. And really, for our purposes in this narrative, it's the life lesson, really, that you will have learned through your elder's narrative. So, narration, it follows a sequence of actions through time, and that's the plot, where you have a number of plot points, points of action that rise up to that climax. And the writer, in telling a story, in narrating, really does make a contract with the reader. Because, for instance, one day last week, when you start out a story with that prompt, that scene setting, your reader automatically knows that you're going to be talking about something that happened last week, and they will orient themselves to that type of situation. So it's a contract you've made with your reader. When I was just 6 years old, we know way back in childhood, we're going to be learning something. My mother told us to keep our voices down so as not to wake our father. The contract that an author makes with a reader when using something like that is that we're going to be learning a lesson. There's something that happened, family dynamics is involved. You set yourself up as a reader from what your author tells you. So you as an author need to understand that contract that you're making with your reader by the words that you choose to use. And one of the most important parts that makes a narration successful is when the writer manipulates time successfully, and we call that pacing. Extending the exciting parts where you create scenes, and shortening mundane parts or long parts. Maybe there are years between certain elements of your informant's story. Then you can use summary in there to speed up some of the smaller parts or the more mundane parts. But you are in control of the time, and that's called pacing. The writer analyzes how much time and detail to spend on each action. That is your authority, your choice, and your craft in deciding how to manipulate that time. Are you going to slow things down by by creating an entire specific dialogue of a certain time? Are you going to, as I said before, shorten many years into just one little summary? How much description are you going to use to paint the setting of a certain scene? Maybe you want to have a very reminiscent tone, so you use reflection in your narration. Maybe you have multiple plot lines of your informant and possibly a plot line of his or her son or coworker or spouse. Maybe you are interviewing a vet, but you're telling that vet's story, but in the meantime, you also tell a little bit of a story of what the family is doing at the same time. So you can use multiple plot lines. And then a writer uses a variety of techniques to sequence events that give the reader the opportunity to piece things together, because that's one of the joys of reading, is that you get to do some of the creation, piecing things together. So you want to think 2 + 2 + 4. Oh, I got 8. You know, the reader is excited when they get to put those all together and get an end result versus, here, I'm giving you 8. So you can do that by using a sense of mystery, suspense, flashbacks, growth, the resolution, and much more pacing that you use. So give the reader some variety to allow them to have some ownership in that story as well. Okay, so the second thing that I need you to do in order to get your full participation points, I'm going to have you read Pavel and Peter, which is from Willa Cather's My Antonia. And Willa Cather is Midwestern during the realism era of American literature. And she's got some great stories. This is one of her most famous, telling about being on the Nebraska frontier. But she meets, in the meantime, when she's young, 2 Russians, Pavel and Peter, and she tells a little bit of a story that she heard from Pavel and Peter. So what I want you to do is to click on this, right there, it's going to go to it. Click on that link, and you'll see an excerpt from My Antonia. What I want you to do, you have commenting rights, and actually I'm just going to give you commenting rights right now. I realized I didn't have that. So you will be able to add a comment. You can do that by Command Option M and get this comment over here, Command Option M, or you can insert comment like that, either way. But what I want you to do using that comment box is to mark, go back, return to full screen here. I want you to mark and comment on the sequence of events. Mark time slowing down. Where do you see time slowing down? Where do you see time speeding up? Where do you see really good use of details and sensory images that really paint that vivid picture of what's going on? Where do you see creative use of punctuation? I want you to mark those. You should have a number of comments throughout this reading that'll probably take you about 10 to 15 minutes in order to read through. But I want you to comment about the time slowing up and speeding down, where you see scenes shifting, an actual scene being created, or a sequence of events, and then the wording, details and sensory image, and use of punctuation. And then I also want you to analyze the setting, characters, and conflict of the exposition. And then where do you see rising action? What do you notice about how that action is rising towards that climax? And then the resolution. How does Willa Cather resolve her story? And then the theme, the message. Remember, you have to have a message running through your narrative. What is the message running through Willa Cather's reading here? So be considering in your own narratives what theme you're really going to be developing in your narrative. And the theme is the message that someone will get after reading through your narrative. There are things like greed, forgiveness, loneliness. Kids can be mean. We let go of dreams. Resilience. I'm sure you'll see a lot of resilience types of themes and messages coming through your interviews. Hope springs eternal. What gave your elders hope? And survival. How did they survive? What did they use for grit? Love requires sacrifice or compromise. I'm sure many of you heard that theme run through some of your interviews. But you can develop the theme that you choose to from what your interviewers or your informants give you. Okay, so the next thing, grammar and punctuation. We're going to run very quickly through the rules for dialogue, because each of you will have dialogue in your narrations or your narratives. So I would like you to read through this, but I'm going to quickly review it. Commas and periods always go inside the quotation marks, always. Comma, quote, period, quotation mark. And if you have punctuation or dialogue divided by a dialogue tag, which is a fabulous way to develop your character, then you use comma, quotation mark, tag, period, comma, or if in the middle of one, excuse me, if you're in the middle of one, it's comma, comma, sorry. And question marks only go inside the quotation mark if what's being quoted is a question, which you see down here as well. The same with exclamation points or marks. Dashes and ellipses, spaces, capitalization when the whole sentence is in quotes, you use the capital. More than one paragraph of dialogue. Some of you might choose to do more than one paragraph of dialogue. Remember that you don't use a quotation mark at the end of the first paragraph if that same person continues speaking in the next, but you use the first one or the quotation mark on the next paragraph of dialogue. And final tips. Standard use of quotation marks uses double quotation marks for regular dialogue and single quotation marks for anything inside those quotation marks or anything quoted by the character. Avoid placing quotation marks around thoughts. You should be able to use your thoughts in either, and it doesn't say it here, but either italics or simply by the way you word it. So read through each one of these, and then using those rules, I would like you to do some dialogue practice. You see this comic strip over here. I would like you to turn this comic strip into narrative dialogue using proper dialogue punctuation from the rules that we just reviewed. So you can see here that in the comic, it tells a story, even though there are just 4 little dialogue bubbles. And our visuals here tell us a little bit, give us some guidance on how to read the tone and the dialogue a bit, but not totally. With just the words, I might be able to say, "This park is so big. Why do you insist in staying close to me?" "Because you're my friend and so sincere." "But I'm not your friend." "See how sincere you are?" I could read it like that. The pictures kind of give me that idea. Or I could look at this and interpret it. "This park is so big. Why do you insist in staying close to me?" "Because you're my friend and so sincere." but I'm not your friend. See how sincere you are? That we can read it in different ways. As I'm looking at this comic strip, I can do that because of the pictures and because I don't have any narration tags or author guiding me in those dialogue tags. So you as the author in your narrative need to do that for your readers so that they read with the tone and the voice that you want them to read with. So I might say, and this is your job, double click on here, and I might say as an example, okay, this park is so big, whined Willa. I'm going to give her a name. Why do you insist, comma, she begged, in staying close to me? Okay, so I have given my character a name here. I have also given her a voice, whined and begged. Now you can choose to do, you can choose to create any voice, any character and character traits that you want to through your narrative tags here, or your dialogue tag, excuse me. But that is what I'd like you to do with this dialogue practice. So each of you, you can put your name there instead of example, and you make some creative dialogue that makes this little comic strip into its own little story. All right, and then the rest of the class actually was going to be Writer's Workshop, where you would take your notes from your narrative planning and pre-write that you have, and any notes that you took from your narrative interview, and begin your rough draft. Your narrative checklist is something you need to consider as you are drafting. Is the voice of myself and my elder, because maybe, again, maybe you want to tell just your elder's story and not have you involved in it at all. Maybe you want to do a frame narrative where you are telling a story and framing your elder's story within your story. That would be okay as well. But is that voice clearly identified and heard throughout this story? Have I identified and developed my setting? Where are you? When is this story happening? Have I fully developed my characters? Do your readers really get a sense of who these elders are? Are you doing that through, how are you doing that? Through dialogue, through description, through imagery, through other characters' thoughts about this character? Many ways that you can develop your character. Have you identified and developed the conflict or tension? How do you set that up? How does your informant, your elder, identify the conflict? What did they say? What language did they use to develop and first of all identify what their conflict or their tension was? Does your story move smoothly from rising action to climax? Are you using different scenes to manipulate your time? As you're looking through and analyzing Pavel and Peter, look for the time phrases that indicate to your reader, we're shifting time, we're in a different scene. Here is a new little moment of time that's going to be told in a story. Is the climax clearly identified? Can any reader know, oh, that was the biggest part of the story? Or is it a flat line? Remember the clip that we watched of our author, Vonnegut, talking about the shape of a story. Remember that high point, that climax that needs to be in every good story. Have you identified and fully communicated your resolution, which really is that lesson learned from your elder? And then have you left your readers with a clear indication of the message? Again, that's somewhat that lesson learned. Does the reader really get that message? So be thinking of those things as you are drafting out your rough draft. And that should be submitted Friday, by midnight Friday, the 27th. And if you have questions, you can email me. I should be able to get back to you very soon. Thank you. Everyone stay safe.